Hi, Stefan the BMW DIY guy. What we're going to be doing today is changing the fuel filter on a 2001 E46 330. Now granted, this is a almost 17-year-old car. That said, it only has 67,000 miles. So it's due for a fuel filter change. This really isn't that hard. The tools that you need to get this done are really, really simple. But what you want to do is be very, very careful. You are going to have to jack your car up. You are going to have to deal with fuel. So there's a few basic caution steps that you're going to want to take to make sure that you're as safe as possible when you do this. So why don't we go out of the garage, get started. Okay, so before we get the car off the ground, a couple of things. I'm always really wary jacking my car. I have a good kind of average consumer 2.5 ton low profile jack. I also have a jack adapter that goes on top of my jack that fits up into the jack pad on the bottom for an E46 to make sure that it fits correctly and lifts well. But I want to stress this really carefully. I wouldn't use your spare tire jack. I don't feel like they're reliable more than about once, and I've broken one on first use when I had a flat tire once under bad circumstances. Be really, really careful. So what I will always do is I will get my jack set up. Now, like I said, I've got my little jack pad here. So I'm going to fit my jack pad to, there's a block here underneath. I'm going to fit my jack pad to it. Then I'm going to slide my jack up to my jack pad to get it set. Now, you can go ahead and use your jack straight on the jack pad, but I have found it tends to chew it up a little bit. What you can do in cases like that, is you can also use a board as well and put the board in between your jack pad and your jack itself. That way you can avoid tearing up your jack pads. Now, if you don't have a jack pad, on one of my E46s, I was missing 3 out of the 4 when I got the car. And so what I did was I replaced them, just ordered them. They stick into the frame with a big plug, so they fit right in. Okay, so it's centered on the jack pad now, and I'm gonna slowly jack the car up. Now, I won't make you sit through jacking the whole car up, but I want to stress this the best I can. Be extremely careful doing this. I'm on a hard level surface here in the garage. I also have 2 jack stands. Don't ever, and I want to look at the camera for this, don't ever bet your life on a hydraulic jack that could fail under pressure, so don't do it. So what you want to do is you want to get it up off the ground with the jack, get your jack stand underneath, and then you can back your jack off a little bit. I'm actually going to put both jack stands in both front and rear, and that will make sure that I'm safe while I'm underneath the car. And that will take care of it. So I'll get the car up and off the ground, and then I'll show you what's next. But I just really wanted to call this out, that you be super careful when you do that, because again, don't bet your life on something that you bought or a cheap hydraulic arm. Okay, so moving as slowly as I can because I don't want to have a lot of camera wiggle here. I want to show you what I've done. So that is where I had the original jack. Jacked it up on that jack pad right there. I've got one jack stand there. I've got the other jack stand under the other jack pad. So I used my jacked the car all the way up until I could get a good height on that rear jack pad. So I then put my jack stand under that, and you can see I've got a piece of lumber in between my jack stand and the jack pad because I'm trying to make sure that I don't ding it up. And a little piece of wood can help. So I then on this side could then use the jack, took the jack down, which still left this front end up in the air a little bit, was able to get my jack stand underneath the jack pad. I then put the jack a little bit further deeper under the body of the car onto the subframe itself, brought it back up just a little bit with the jack so that the car would be level, and I put my jack stand underneath the jack pad, and then I lowered it down off the jack. So at this point, I've got good, strong jack stands underneath the car because I'm going to be underneath the car about right here. You can see I'm just basically behind the driver's side wheel, and the fuel filter is about 18 inches in underneath the car right here. It's going to be a little bit hard to show, so I'm going to have to show you the best I can. If I had a lift today and I could get the car up on a lift, it would be easier to show, but I also want to show what it's like to do this at home. I'm not trying to be paranoid, but I want to stress again, do not trust your life on a jack, especially the one that's in your trunk. Go down to your local hardware store, order online, get a good jack stand, jack stands, at least 2, and a good jack, so you can get your car off the ground safely, and use the jack stands. Even if you were just using 1, and use the jack to get your car up off the ground, get the jack stand up and underneath your car, so if your jack fails, it'll hit the jack stand and not you. So I really want to stress that. It's one of those things that I think is super important as you do any work like this underneath your car. If you don't have an opportunity to use a full lift, like I've done in some other projects, like I've done with my partner, the self-serve garage in Tacoma, use a lift if you can. It's probably worth it to rent one for the day, get your car off the ground safely, all the way up above your head, and you could do this work even faster. If you're gonna do it at home, which I wanted to show for once, you can do it with jacks and jack stands pretty simply right here. Just do it safely. Okay, so now I'm gonna crawl underneath the car, show you where the fuel filter is. So I'm gonna try to pan slowly so you can see. Here we are looking at the driver's side tire. You can see my light. As we come underneath the car, right here, you can see this is the cover for your fuel filter right here. There's a couple of bolts here and here that we're going to take off. There's a couple up beyond the bend that are going to be almost impossible to show, but I'm going to do my best. So you're going to pull this and a couple on the other side and a couple up around the bend, and it'll come off. So when that comes off, you should be able to get to your fuel filter. Now your fuel filter looks like a long barrel. So as I come back, your fuel filter looks like this. So we're going to get to it, and it's covered by that plate. So we're going to get to it, be able to take it off. This is an important thing to do as part of this kind of service too. This car has 67,000 miles on it. It's had good fuel in it through its life, but it's time for that fuel filter to get changed. So that's going to be next. I'm going to pull those covers. It's going to take a socket, and I'm going to pull those 2 covers, or pull the cover, those couple of bolts, and pull those covers, and then I'll show you what's next. This is the cover off. It's actually easier to show with it off what exactly I did. So this is where it's on the bottom of your car. This is the front. This is the back. You've got 3 8mm bolts here, here, and here. And then around the curve, as it curves up underneath the car, you've got 2 of these little kind of hat nuts that are here and here. They're also 8mm. If you have a deep socket, that helps. My standard 8mm socket could just barely reach over the top of the post to get those little hats off, those little 8mm hat nuts off. And then this plate comes off. So when it comes off, be careful when you take it off. You're probably going to get a face full of dirt. Who knows what's all caught up in here. Try not to have your face directly underneath it. Okay, so the cover's off and you can set that aside. Now make sure that you don't lose those 3 bolts or those 2 nuts. Now, I'm going to do my best to try to show where the fuel filter is. As you can see, as I grab the new one here, as it sits in this orientation in the car. So you've got the 2 feeds at the back, you've got the 2 connections at the front. It's even marked with the arrow. You can see, and you can compare it against the existing one in your car. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind, you're dealing with fuel lines. So the best way to get fuel out of your fuel lines is to go in and pull your fuel pump fuse. Actually pull the fuse in, it's on an E46, it's in the glove box. Yeah, you can pull the fuse out. There's a little card that'll identify which fuse to pull. Pull the fuse and then start your car. Your car's going to run for a second. It's going to burn all the fuel that it can get because the fuel pump isn't running, and then will stop. That will reduce the amount of fuel in your fuel lines significantly so as you take these off. Now, I also take off one at a time, and I'm very careful to do that. To do so, I also have a little ratcheting clamp that I'm going to clamp onto the rubber sections of the fuel lines to try to cut down on leaking as well, as best I can. Now, there's one thing I do want to show very distinctly, and I want to move here very slowly. What I've done as prep is I've got 4 new hose clamps. The hose clamps that are on the hoses now really are one use. You'll find that they're pretty easy to take off with a straight screwdriver, but they do not screw back on normally. BMW apparently intended for them to be a single-use hose clamps. So what I did is I got 4 good hose clamps. I got the very specific ones that are made for these brake lines, so they're the absolute right diameter. Excuse me, 3, because one of them doesn't take a hose clamp. Excuse me, there's 3. And these are reusable, they're better, but you have to prep beforehand. Don't take the hose clamps off thinking you're going to reuse what's on the car now, because you're not. So let me try to get underneath the car and show what it looks like with the cover off. This is the back of the fuel filter, so this would be the rear side, not the motor side, the trunk side of it. You can see the two connections. You can see the 4 hose clamps. The 2 hose clamps closest to the filter are the 2 that we're going to take off. And like I said, these are single use. You can also see it sitting in this little metal bracket that we can take off as well. So we'll take off that, and you can see the bolt for the little metal bracket that's secure to keep it in place. And then you've got the 2 connections at the other end. You've got the lighter little hose that is not a vacuum or doesn't have a hose clamp on it, and that can just be pulled off and slid back on the new filter. And then you've got the primary fuel line right there that has also got the hose clamps as well. I'm going to you can see the little sections in between where the hose clamps are. That's where I'm going to put my little ratcheting clip to help cut down on flow, to help reduce any dripped fuel. I'm also going to put down some cardboard underneath because you're going to drip a little bit while you do this. And I also do a single hose at a time. So I'll pull off one. I usually start at the front, and I'll undo this clamp around the fuel filter. Then I'll pull the hose without the hose clamp, and I'll put it on the new one. And then I'll pull the clamp that's closest to the filter here on the front. This is the motor side. And then I'll feed it onto the new filter as quickly as I can. I'll leave the 2 caps on because your filter should come with caps over the top of those connections. And so I'll leave those caps on so any fuel that comes back through the fuel filter won't come out the other end. Again, really trying to reduce the amount that I spill. Cuts down on breathing it, if nothing else. So the next step is going to be basically just pulling those hoses off one at a time and putting them on and having the right hose clamps in place and ready to go. So make sure you have your tools handy because this is something you're going to want to do quickly. Next step is, like I said, is going to remove that little retaining clip from around it, set that aside, and then I'm going to start on the front and go to the back, and I'll show you the new filter when I'm done. The new fuel filter is in, so that's looking at the driver's side tires. I work my way back underneath the car. So let's look at the new fuel filter here. You can see it's there in place with the new hose clamps. Same thing down at the motor side with the 1 hose with the new hose clamp and that like little vacuum hose on the side. I've got the retaining bracket already back on with the 10mm bolt. The covers are 8mm. That little bracket, the single nut that keeps that bracket on, is a 10mm. I want to emphasize a couple of things. One, you are going to get a little bit of fuel out of your lines. They won't be dry, so make sure to be doing this in a place where you have good airflow and you're not sucking gasoline fumes like crazy. It's not good for you at all. Make sure to pull the fuse on your fuel pump and run your motor until it stops. That will burn as much fuel as possible in your fuel lines. Plus, if you don't do that, the fuel in your fuel lines not only will be full, but they'll be under pressure as well. So you're going to get gas all over if you don't do that. It's really not a good idea. I had a little bit of cardboard under this to soak up any of the extra that did spill out, so I was able to clean that up really easily, just pull the cardboard out. You can see the lines are in place. The one other thing I found as well is that and I'm showing the back right here, where that rubber connection is, where the rubber hose is between the metal fuel line and the fuel filter, I found it fused down really hard and weren't easily coming off. So what I ended up doing was taking a small flat-bladed screwdriver, very carefully working it between the hose and the nozzle on the fuel filter to kind of break that seal. And then I could tell as soon as it broke free because I could start to rotate the hose on the fuel filter pipe itself and then slowly worked its way off. So worked them off, quickly stuck it onto the new fuel filter to try to reduce as much spillage as possible and get it into place. Put the bracket back on. Now all I need to do is put the cover back on and we're going to be done there, and then carefully lower the car back down off the jack stands in the reverse order that I put it up. So I'll get the cover on and then we'll show the last part. The cover is back on. You've got the 3 8mm bolts, and then you've got those 2 kind of hat nuts. They kind of look like a wizard's hat, kind of, sort of, that are also 8mm to put that cover back on. I also double checked that all of my hose clamps were tight to make sure that there was no issues there. And we're back looking at taking the car down off the jacks. So just reverse the process that you did before. So what I would do is I put my jack under that rear, jack it up, take out the jack stand, lower that side, come back, put my jack under this side, take out this jack stand, and lower the car. So with that done, what you're going to want to do is fire the car up and check for any leaks. I don't want to do that in the air. Some people might do that. I'm not going to. But make sure that you don't have any leaks coming out from any of your connections that you've made. The car may stumble a little bit at first when you first fire it up because you've got fuel that's still being pumped through the hoses and through your fuel filter that needs to be refilled. So it may stutter a little bit, so if it does, don't worry. When it charges the system, it may not stutter at all. So just something to call out. All right, so take your car off the jacks, fire it up, make sure it runs, and you're good to go. Back in after successfully starting the car, and it ran just fine after changing the fuel filter. Just let's review a couple of things really quickly. Number one, all the cautions about jacking your car up. I'm serious about that. Don't put your life on the line for a $200 or $300, even $1,000 jack. It's not worth it. Also, the trick of pulling the fuse on your fuel pump, you can look at your owner's manual, you can look at the little card that slides out by your fuse panels, you lower your glove box and drop that little panel and you see your fuses. Pull the right fuse for your fuel pump and then start the car. It'll run just for a second or two, sputter and stop because it'll burn up all the fuel. That'll take care of most of the fuel in the lines and you have a lot less to spill that way. If you don't, again, you're going to be dealing with high pressure fuel lines at that point. You're going to blow gas all over the place. It's not safe, it's not healthy, don't do it. All in all, not that hard. A few bolts, that cover comes off, a few hose clamps that you definitely should replace, and all the parts and things you're going to need I'll have listed in the description below. But as you can see, this is something you can do yourself, and the labor on this is fairly high if you take it to the shop by comparison to what it takes to do. So if you have the basic tools to get the work done, this is something you can absolutely do at home and save yourself that time and effort. So if you like what you've seen today, please click subscribe. Really appreciate it. Really makes a difference. I answer all the questions I can, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.